Hi guys, Erin here. This lecture will talk about research ideas and hypotheses. I hope that this will be useful for you, particularly in starting your research proposal. Here's where this lecture fits in the context of the whole course and of the whole quantitative research process. We'll be talking about how you get an idea for a research project, how you narrow that idea down so that it addresses one specific research question that hasn't been addressed before. The next step to this then is developing a strong hypothesis, which is your prediction or guess of what you think that answer might be. These two steps, forming a research question and a hypothesis, will be the launching point for the rest of the course. Here's an overview of what we'll be talking about today. So let's start with the research idea. For your research proposal, you have the opportunity to propose a study to address really any question that you find interesting in the context of children and youth. This is the exciting part of research because it allows you, and the interesting part, because it allows you to really investigate something that you find interesting. But some of you might be wondering, where do you get started on this? How do you find ideas? The answer to this is they're really all around you. I'll give you some examples. This is the back of my Sudoku book. Take a look at this statement right down here. The number puzzle game of Sudokus helps to improve our numeracy and logical thinking skills. Solving puzzles will help keep you sharp. Well, maybe you'll wonder, is this really true for everybody? Is this true for you as a typically developing, healthy young adult? Most of you fall into that category. Maybe maybe doing Sudokus has a different effect for children who are just learning how to do math versus adults who are at risk for developing Alzheimer's. So all of these could potentially be questions that you want to address for your research proposal. Here's another example from a book that I'm reading right now. Highly recommend this book, by the way. The idea of this book is, well, that first of all, too many children in North America are not learning how to read well. And one possible solution to this problem is teaching educators, future educators, maybe like yourself, more about the science of reading and teaching them about what research has shown to be effective instructional practices for children in general and also for children at risk for developing reading disabilities. This book has given me lots of ideas about the potential impact of teaching educators about this and then looking to see how this might translate into improved reading outcomes in their students. So stay tuned. This might be a research project that I develop in the future. Once you have decided on an idea that you want to pursue more, the next step is going to previous research and reading what has been done before and what important things we still don't know. So your job at this point is to read a lot and then hone in on one specific piece of the puzzle that your research proposal could address. This is a research question. So to do this, like I said, you have to read a lot, but don't worry, we'll talk about how you can make this a little bit more streamlined. How do you find research articles? Well, your textbook talks about different database searches that you can use. Me personally, I like Google Scholar. It has a look and feel like Google, it'll only give you hits that come from sources that you can trust, are more scholarly, or come from accredited peer-reviewed journals. Why don't I show you what I mean? All right, so here in Google, all you have to do is type in Scholar, Google Scholar, and let's say you want to look at, here I have this ready already, the science of reading, teaching reading. A nice feature here in Google Scholar is you can limit the range, the date that it was published, and here are all the hits that you get. You get a lot. Let's just look at this first one. If we look at this bit here, this cited by 1,198, this gives you an indication that this article here is pretty influential. A lot of people have written about it in their own work. If you click on this, you can find all those other articles that have been published since this one, but that have referred to it. This might be useful for you once you find an article that you really find interesting and you want to know what's been done since then. So if we click on this, we'll get this hit here, how psychological science informs the teaching of reading. One of the first things you'll see here is the abstract. The abstract is your friend. The abstract is a summary of the whole article. You're gonna read a lot of abstracts to find fewer number set of articles that you're gonna wanna read in more detail because you might use them in your research proposal. The last sentence of an abstract is usually really helpful for you because it will give the conclusion of what the whole article is about. So this one in particular talks about how phonics instruction is really important and how teachers who help make the alphabetic principle explicit for their students help their students become skilled readers. So this gives you the statement of what everything that the article is going to talk about is about. The abstract will also give you clues about what kind of article this is. If you see words like this monograph discusses, sections review, the implications are discussed, all of these kinds of words are clues to you that this is what we call a secondary source article. It is basically a summary of lots of different primary source or other articles that have been done. Secondary source articles are really useful because they give you just the summary of what's been done. They give you a lay of the land. They maybe will point you in directions for your research proposal and suggest what we still need to know. And so what we do know and what we don't yet know. The danger with a secondary source article is that it's somebody else's summary, somebody else's essay. So as a result, it may be incomplete. For example, this one's already 15 years old. It might be inaccurate, and it might be biased. So you can't just stop at a secondary source article. You need to go and look for the primary source articles that this article is going to talk about. So what's a primary source article? For that, let me show you another search page. So let's say we want to look more in detail about interventions for kids with reading disabilities. And we've honed in the date range to look for really recent articles. Let's take a look at this first one. Just the title will give you a lot of information. The title usually is the purpose of the study or what their main findings were. You might recognize this author. He's a faculty member in CHYS. Now let's take a look at the abstract. The first sentence gives you the purpose of the study. The next few sentences give you details about the methods. So who was tested, what happened during the study, what they were tested on. This is a clue to you that this is a primary source article. Similarly, we see the results. They're giving us numbers. They're telling us differences between different groups of people. This is another clue to you that this is a primary source article. If we keep scrolling down to the end of the abstract, you'll see again the last sentence will be really useful for you and tell you what their main conclusion of their whole study was. So in this case, the main conclusion from this study was that the earlier kids receive intervention, the better. So let's scroll through this article and talk about the different sections. The first section is the introduction. This will be very similar to what you do for your research proposal. What you need to do here is summarize what's been done before and highlight what we still don't know and why it's important for us to do a study to find out the answer to what we don't know. So an introduction usually ends with research questions or hypothesis, which is what the authors predict to be the answer to those research questions. The next sections are the methods, where they talk about the participants and the measures. In this case, there was also an intervention, so they talk about the intervention. Scroll down, we see the results section. Here's a nice figure. It shows us reading outcomes in students after they either received a evidence-based intervention program versus what they received as a control condition in their regular school program. And we can see it grouped based on the grade they were when they received it. And so you can see that the kids who got intervention had higher reading scores than those who didn't. In future lectures, we'll be talking about what kind of study this is and what are some of the pros and cons of different research designs. Let's scroll down. The next section after the results is the discussion section. The first paragraph of the discussion is really important. It will tell you what the most important results are. The rest of the discussion is going to talk about what those results mean and how they fit into the context of what's been done before. So when I'm reading an article, and I've read the abstract and I've decided I want to read this article in more detail, sometimes what I'll do is read the last paragraph of the intro to I have an idea of what the research questions were, and then this first paragraph of the discussion, so that I have a sense in my head of what they found. Sometimes I'll decide at this point, this isn't really relevant, I don't need to read this article in detail. Similarly, the last paragraph of the whole article is your conclusion, and you want to read that because it's going to tell you in a very concise way what the most important findings from this study are. In the discussion section, usually towards the end, there is often a section called limitations or future directions. This section will give you ideas for how you can build on this study. So limitation is where the authors of this paper are telling what maybe wasn't so great about the study and what could be done better in the future. And this could be exactly what you propose to do for your research proposal. So for example, the first limitation that they talk about in this study was about the research design, that they weren't able to randomly assign kids to either get the intervention or the control condition. And as a result, this is what we'll call in this course a quasi-experimental design. Maybe for your study, you'll want to propose a different kind of research design that could address some of those limitations. Another limitation that a lot of times that is discussed in a lot of articles is about the particular participants that they selected to be in the study. So for example, maybe the participants in the study all came from high socioeconomic status backgrounds, and they didn't test kids that maybe came from less affluent background. The problem with this is that you'll never know if the conclusions that these authors were able to find also applies to those other kids. So maybe for your study, you'll want to propose to test that group of kids or a more diverse pool of participants. So all of this is to say, for your research proposal, the first step is coming up with a general idea that interests you, and then reading a lot of articles, skimming a lot of articles to find a smaller set that you're going to read in detail to perhaps review for your research proposal. You'll want to, in particular, read over the abstract, the conclusion, and the first paragraph of the discussion, because this will really give you a sense of, help you budget your time and decide what you want to read in more detail. The limitations or future direction section could also give you ideas for your own research proposal. You're going to want to read both secondary source articles to get a summary of the land, but you're also going to want to read primary source articles so that you can read for yourself what others have done in their designs. All of this will allow you to propose a specific research question. This is the question that you'll address in your research proposal. Once you have a research question, the next step is to form a hypothesis. A hypothesis is like your best guess of what the answer to that research question might be. It's a statement that describes or explains the relationship between two variables. The hypothesis is the center of your whole study. It can lead to various predictions that you can observe and measure and that you'll propose to do in your research proposal. So let's give an example. So let's say you are interested in studying the importance of sleep, and you narrow in on a research question that you want to address whether there's a relationship between the amount of sleep and how students do on a test. You'll narrow this in and reformulate it as a hypothesis, which is your guess of what the answer might be. It could be phrased something like this: students who sleep at least 8 hours a night prior to a test will score higher than those who sleep less than 6 hours. There's 4 features of a good hypothesis. It's logical, so it flows logically from what's been done before and what your specific research question is. It's testable. It's possible to recruit participants and measure your variables. It's refutable. It's possible to come up with results that go against your hypothesis. And it's always written in the positive way. So let's say you want to see if there is a difference between two groups. Your hypothesis would be there is a difference between two groups on this measure, not there is no difference between two groups. So here are 3 examples of 3 hypotheses. 2 of these are good and 1 of these are bad. Why don't you pause the recording here and see if you can find the one that's the bad hypothesis. All right, let's see. The answer is the last one's the bad hypothesis. The first 2 are logical, testable, refutable, and written as a positive statement. Some of you maybe weren't sure about that second one, but I think it is still possible to find a group of people who say that they were abducted by aliens and test their paranoia and compare it to the general population. That last one is not a good hypothesis because it's not possible to go back in time and imagine a world if COVID had never happened. So this one is just not great because it's not testable. This could be rephrased and made into a good hypothesis if you said the amount of anxiety in adolescence is higher on average now than it was in the past before COVID happened. So to summarize everything that we've talked about today, the first steps in the research process are you want to come up with an idea, read what's been done before so that you can narrow your proposal in to address a question that we still don't know the answer to. And you can do this by using Google Scholar and looking for these articles that we talked about and these parts of the articles. The next step then is to form a hypothesis that will describe the relationship or explain the relationship between 2 variables. A good hypothesis is the glue of your whole study. All of your methods and all of your results are going to flow from this hypothesis. A good hypothesis is, see if you can fill in these blanks. Testable, refutable, positive, and what's the last one? See if you can answer it. See you next time.